Welcome to the Stoic Thunder podcast, taking an ancient philosophy for a 21st century test drive, learning on the way. Since I began utilizing Stoicism as a philosophy of life, I have experienced the subtle yet powerful impact it has had on my outlook, my decision-making, thought processes, and my personal relationships. But it hasn't all been smooth sailing. I have a lifetime of behavioral patterns, insecurities, and, history to contend with. Having to deal with the reactionary mind isn't easy. And while Stoicism helps bring clarity, reason, and rationality to the forefront, it won't suddenly help to disengage that immediate physiological reaction that our reptilian brain blesses us with. But what about when our perspective is such that we can experience such a strong aversion to something that can then be altered seemingly in an instant? Perspective is such an important part of Stoicism. It can be the difference between suffering needlessly or allowing you enough clarity to solve your problem, or at the very least readjust and examine your efforts. I recently had a reminder just how strongly my biases informed my perspective, and with a little introspection and a few Stoic exercises, I was able to get to the heart of the problem, and not only change my perspective, but I was able to free myself from much confusion, frustration, and ultimately pain. Like a lot of people during the pandemic, I lost my job. I had been in this job almost half my life. I was good at it, very good, and it had become part of my identity. It wasn't particularly challenging, but it was very creative and I loved it. But I also knew that I was capable of more and that I didn't challenge myself enough. I had learning anxieties and that ever-present fear of change that kept me comfortable. One day I'll step out and prove I was capable of much more. Then COVID. It was no longer a choice of one day. That day was today. There was a short respite where I was able to attempt to ascertain what my next step would be. I knew I wanted a career, not just a job. And luckily, I sort of stumbled into a vocation that, had it not been for losing my job, I might never have considered. It has a learning curve, there's training involved, and as it's a rather solitary art form, I knew I needed to be able to organize myself in order to be successful. I had habitual processes to grow out of, but it was exciting. I started to get work and it felt great. But with this particular type of work, it's not a sprint, but more of a marathon. And so a day job would be required, at least for a little while. I hadn't been on an interview for 2 decades. I was going to be around new people, new duties, and for almost a year, I would be surrounded by the general public. My family knew what a big deal this was and were incredibly supportive. And although I was nervous, I was offered the job the same day I'd been interviewed. Fantastic. On paper, the job was perfect. Local, friendly, structured but not too strict. And although physically demanding, I wasn't alone, and I definitely felt welcome and appreciated. And I hated it. I don't usually like using that term. There are a lot of things I dislike, but hate is so powerful in its blinding nature that it's beyond mere distaste and is the antithesis of reason. But I hated this job. I would feel apprehension, sadness, annoyance even running up to when I would have to go. And probably worst of all, I found myself choosing to be apathetic in my duties. Not outwardly, of course, but I didn't care. I wished the hours away, feeling stuck. It was odd. Not every job is going to be a dream, but there really wasn't any good reason I could see for my feelings about it. Stoically, I did everything I could to guide me through this difficulty. I was grateful to have a job. I was helping my family. I'd come up against challenges that I didn't know I could deal with, And yet I never gave myself credit for that because I was clouded by this aversion. I used negative visualization, a view from above, attempting to minimize my issues with it. I was attempting to follow the 4 Stoic virtues, but the feeling was so strong. Then I figured it out. I thought I was better than this. I've never been an elitist or someone who judges someone by their job, but here I was judging myself. The job was fine, better than fine. But I realized I had gone from something where I was in a position of power, not over people so much, but I was a decision maker, a consultant, in a position where I wasn't just a cog in the machine. And now, here I was doing a basic job for hours on end. The same processes over and over again. And it was my fault. And I felt kind of disgusted with myself for thinking it was beneath me. Apprehension is something that plagues most people. But with effort, it's something that can be overcome, as I've said before, by action. Pressure doesn't always help, of course, but with a change in perspective, almost anything is possible. In the interim before taking the job, I let self-doubt and the sheer magnitude of entering a completely new world get to me, and I wasn't pushing hard enough. Hence the fault. Once I realized that it was a problem with me more than it was with the job, I felt lighter. I started to see just how great it was, and whilst I don't plan on being there forever, I began to see how lucky I was, and that this whole endeavor was a challenge and almost a gift. To be able to see what I truly want, despite any apprehension, and how grateful I was for having a job I loved for so many years. Without realizing it, I had engaged in a Stoic exercise known as voluntary discomfort. Of a kind, anyway. I could have given up the job and found another, but I knew despite my reservations it was the right thing to do, to press on. Challenges for some seem to carry a negative connotation. You might foresee struggles, failures, or even pain. That is likely enough to keep a lot of people stuck, but I really feel by mistaking comfort for pleasure, we do ourselves a disservice, and why ultimately we may feel unfulfilled. Challenges don't have to be complex or large in scope, but they do have to get you out of your comfort zone. You never know. You might look from the other side and realize you really didn't know what you were capable of, what you're willing to do, and what you learn about yourself, good or bad, along the way. And so to one of my favorite quotes from Seneca. No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. And on perspective, we are disturbed not by things, but by the view which we take of them. Epictetus.